Hey guys, it's Tori and it's time for my Victober wrap up. First of all, before we start, I apologize for any glare on my glasses. I'm trying to film when the lighting is not quite so glary, but unfortunately my prescription for my contacts is expired, so I need to make an appointment with my eye doctor, but I keep forgetting and I don't know when I'm going to be doing it, and I only have one pair of contacts left that are kind of like, I'm really trying to spread out when I wear them just because I want to wear them only when I really need to. So anyway, just wearing glasses right now until I can get that eye appointment in, which is fine, but it just means that there might be some glare in these videos until I can figure that out. So anyway, getting into the books, I ended up completing only 3 books for Victober, which is totally fine. Like, I usually don't read a ton in Victober just because Victorian literature, while I love it, it does take me a little bit more time to get through. And I am in school and working technically 3 jobs, but really 2 that take up a good amount of time. Yeah, so I have a lot going on. I just don't have enough time to just binge read all the time, which is sad, but just the way it is. So I feel pretty good about this. There is one other reason why I think I didn't get very far into my Victober TBR, and I'll mention that in a second, but let's just get right into the books. So the first book I completed this month was Shirley by Charlotte Brontë, which I ended up giving a 2.53 out of 5 stars. I think on Goodreads I actually may have changed it to 2 stars because I think it might have been more on that side of things. Unfortunately, I didn't love this, and I think this is one of the reasons why I didn't get through very much for my Victober TBR, because I started off with this and I really didn't love it, and so it was such a slog to get through. It was just very boring overall. This was over 600 pages worth of basically no plot. I had to laugh a little bit because the synopsis on the back, I usually don't read synopses because, especially for classics, because obviously they have a lot of spoilers, as many of you I'm sure already know. And this was no different. I read the synopsis before I read this. However, I'm a little bit more forgiving of the synopsis having spoilers because, to be frank, what was in the synopsis was really all that happens in this story. So I feel like they couldn't have really put much else. So yeah, it was good, but it should have been a lot shorter. The writing's beautiful. Like, Charlotte Brontë has incredible writing, and there were definitely a couple moments where I got choked up with just my attachment to the characters. While I didn't love the characters, I still felt enough attachment to them to appreciate their story and their feelings and things that were going on in their lives. I will say though, Shirley as a character, not my fave. I thought she was just a bad friend and I didn't really love her. I feel like a lot of other people really like Shirley, but I felt like she was a bad friend, and I felt like she was kind of, I don't want to say stupid because that sounds so mean and like too strong of a word, but she just was very unaware of other people's feelings. That's a better way to put it. She was very unaware of other people's feelings and very just not aware of how her actions would be taken, to the point where like things she did would obviously have a certain reaction, and she just was like, what? Why would you think that? And I didn't like her very much, unfortunately. I mean, there were good things about this, like I said, but it was just very much a slog to get through and did not set off my Victober on a very high note, which made it a lot harder to continue reading Victorian literature the rest of the month. So next, I completed Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell. This was my very first Elizabeth Gaskell I've ever read, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was so good. This follows Ruth, who she's very naive. She doesn't grow up with a mother, and her father recently passed away as well, and she's also very young at the beginning of this, so just all those different things combined together to make her just very naive about the world, and she ends up in a situation where she falls in love with this man and he uses her and she becomes a fallen woman. She ends up getting pregnant outside of wedlock. He abandons her, and things kind of go on from there. I loved Elizabeth Gaskell's writing. I found it really easy to get into. I loved all the characters in this. I felt like they were very dynamic characters and also very flawed. Like, there were several characters I felt, or I guess one character in particular, who was almost perfect in a lot of ways, but he still had some flaws, and I really appreciated that added depth to all of the characters. I liked Ruth as a character a lot. She reminded me, I mentioned this in my reading vlogs, but she reminded me a lot of Fantine from Les Miserables, which Fantine's one of my favorite characters from Les Mis. So I absolutely loved getting to read a book that was pretty much all about someone who was just like Fantine, but had a lot more hope to it than Fantine's story necessarily does. One thing I did not like about this was, first of all, the ending was it was very unsatisfying to me. I didn't mind exactly what happened at the end of the story. It's a slightly tragic ending, but not as tragic as other Victorian books I've read, but it just happened. The tragedy happened in a way that I didn't really like and that I found unsatisfying, and so I really was disappointed in that. I also felt like there were some portions in the middle that were kind of unnecessary. Like, there were several portions where Sally, the housekeeper in this house Ruth ends up in, really just tells her a bunch of stories about her life, and I just didn't really, like, it was kind of fun, and I didn't mind that it was in there. It wasn't one of those things where I'm like, I hate that this is in here, but I also was kind of like, did this need to be in there? Like, what was the point of that? Anyway, so those are kind of some of my thoughts. Oh, the other thing I didn't like about it was there's a couple in it, Jemima and Farquhar, I don't even know how to say his name, never knew. But they just were really obnoxious people. Like, I felt like they had redeeming qualities. They weren't completely horrible. But Jemima especially, I felt like was very selfish and just super over dramatic about things. And granted, I think she's supposed to be because she's young, but it was just, yeah, hard to read her hot-headedness, essentially. And then Farquhar, or whatever his name is, was very bland, and I had a lot more hope that he would add a lot more to the plot than he ended up doing, which I was disappointed in. But anyway, I just felt like there was a lot of potential for that character to really be a standout character, and he wasn't. So anyway, but overall, super good. Love it. Definitely recommend if you've read Elizabeth Gaskell and haven't gotten to this one, as I know this is one of her less well-known ones, so I think a lot of people haven't read this. But yeah, it was really good, and I'm excited to read more by her. And the third and final book that I completed this month was The Odd Woman by George Gissing, which I ended up giving 4 out of 5 stars as well. I really enjoyed this. The story follows several women who are part of the grouping The Odd Women in London, meaning that they are unpaired, unmarried. 3 of these women are sisters, 2 of which are pretty much old spinsters at this point. They're not super old, but for the Victorian time period, they would be considered old spinsters, and they just work for a living. Their father passed away when they were pretty young, and so they've had to make a living for themselves. And then the youngest, Monica, of these sisters ends up getting married, but is very unhappy in this marriage. And then we also have Mary Barfoot and Rhoda Nunn, who are 2 women who work together to run this school where they teach women how to use a typewriter so that they can get better positions and make better money for themselves, since they're having to live alone. They're not able to get married, or they choose not to. And it's very, very feminist, especially for the Victorian period, which was very interesting to read. I will say, I think the only reason it's not a 4 stars is pretty much because what gets a 5-star for me, especially when it comes to classics, is often when it's very dramatic. That's why I like Hardy. I really like sensation novels. Like, those are my favorite things to read in Victorian literature, is just that over-the-top drama. I like some strong emotions in characters, as long as they're like emotionally regulated to some extent, because I know I just talked about Jemima and her overwhelming emotions, but I feel like she didn't handle them very well, and I don't feel like she learned to handle them very well. Like, I think it hinted that maybe she did, but I don't feel like I got to see that journey with her and Ruth. But in this, I felt like there was a lot of emotion, but it just wasn't explored in a way that I could really enjoy it. And I will also say that I thought Rhoda Nunn was a very interesting character, but I had some mixed feelings about her, which I think was part of what made her so interesting. So I really liked her. I just felt like she definitely had some strong flaws, and there were moments that she really drove me crazy. I also felt like Monica, I feel like Rhoda Nunn and Monica are the ones that are most focused on, and I felt like Monica also had some moments where she bothered me a little bit. And I will say, the other thing I didn't love about this was that the synopsis and things I had heard had led me to believe this was about 5 women. And in a sense it is, but it mostly focuses on Monica and Rhoda Nunn, which is totally fine. It's not very long, so I feel like it had to focus in on a couple. But even the beginning mostly focused on Monica's older sisters for the first couple chapters, and so it really threw me off when suddenly we were mostly focusing on Rhoda Nunn and Monica. So I'd say go into this knowing it focuses more on Rhoda Nunn and Monica than the others, although it does like focus in on them a little bit. It's mostly those 2 characters in particular that are focused on. But other than that, it was so good. Very interesting look at women's position during this time. I also felt like the male characters were well explored in this, which I was a little worried that it would mostly focus on the female characters and wouldn't really expound on the male characters. And it really did, in a way that just felt very balanced with the way the females were discussed. And the Rhoda Nunn's relationship situation was super interesting to read about. It was a lot to think about, and I feel like I still need some time to really process this book and all that it had in it, because despite its length, there really was a lot that went on in this and a lot that it had to say, but it was all pretty subtle. So like on the surface, it seems like a fairly simple story, but the more you think about it, the more depth you see in the characters. And since I just honestly finished this a couple days ago, I feel like I still need time to really fully process it, to get all my thoughts organized on how I felt about everything that happened. So sorry this is a little bit all over the place. This little review is kind of all over the place, but just know I enjoyed it. Like I mentioned, there were those couple things that sort of bothered me, but I'm still processing, so I can't give a super solid, cohesive review right now, but it was really good, and I do still feel good about a 4 stars, even though I haven't completely processed it. I think 4 stars is definitely what I'll settle on no matter what. That just feels really good to me. So anyway, really good, and if you haven't picked this up yet, I definitely recommend it, because it is one that's very thought-provoking. Okay, and then even though I only finished 3 books, I did get close to finishing, or at least start, 3 others. So first of all, as I've mentioned in my vlogs, I've been working my way through The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. I am currently only a couple hundred pages from the end, so hopefully I'll be able to finish it by the end of the first week of November, so within the next several days from when I'm filming this. And I am really obsessed with it. I still love it. I love all the characters, and I will probably... car horn. I will probably be giving this 5 out of 5 stars unless something terrible happens at the end, but I think it's going to stick at a 5 stars, and I would say that this is probably my favorite thing I read during Victober, even though I haven't finished it yet. I feel like because of its length and the fact that I'm only a couple hundred pages from the end, I think it will be really hard for it to fall from a 5-star read for me. So I think this was my favorite read for this year, and I think it's one of my new favorite Victorian literature pieces of all time, if not one of my favorite books of all time. Like, I loved it that much so far. So anyway, so excited to read more Trollope in the future after this experience. So then, if you watched my vlog part 2, you know that I started A Tale of Two Cities, meaning I read the first couple pages and I just wasn't feeling it, and I really want to give that book a fair chance. So I think I'm going to hold off on that one, read it later. But I did end up changing and picking up A Pair of Blue Eyes by Thomas Hardy. I'm literally only 50 pages into this when I'm filming because I picked it up after I kind of decided to calm down a little bit on reading because I have a lot of school stuff going on and I don't want to overwhelm myself. So I've just kind of been slowly making my way through, reading when I can. Hopefully this week I'll be able to read a little bit more. I will say in the first 50 pages I'm really liking it. This definitely feels like already one of the more romantic books by Hardy. I feel like a lot of Hardy's books with romances, I like them, but they just don't take the story for me. Most of them, like, I like the romance, but there's other things about Hardy's novels that draw me in a little bit more. This one, on the other hand, has been very romance heavy from the get-go. Like, the romance, I'm pretty sure this will end up being a love triangle, but the romance with the first guy that this girl meets starts off very quickly, and this is actually based on, so the main female character, Elfriede, is based on Hardy's first wife, Emma, that's her name, and a lot of people believe that the guy who is first introduced is based on Hardy himself, although he argued against that, but people kind of take what he said with a grain of salt. So kind of interesting based on their actual love story, and especially reading this first part, and like I said, it feels very romantic. It's very interesting to think of it in that light of Hardy basing this on his own romance with his wife, and it's cute so far. I'm very interested to see how the rest of it goes. Also, fun fact about A Pair of Blue Eyes. If you've ever wondered where we got the term cliffhanger from, it actually came from this book. So this book was originally written in serialized form, so a little portion written in the newspapers. I think it's every week that usually serialized novels came out. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Hardy in one of those serialized portions literally left one of his characters hanging off a cliff in this book, and hence came the term cliffhanger. So, you know, if you love using that term, if you love cliffhangers, you have Hardy to thank for that term. And the last book I've started in the month of October that I'll finish in November is not a Victorian literature piece, and it's the only one obviously on this list that is not Victorian, but that is Haldol and Hyacinths, A Bipolar Life by Melody Moezzi. I'm actually reading this for school, but I'm also really enjoying it, and I think a lot of people might be interested in something like this, which is why I'm mentioning it. But it is what it sounds like. It's a mental health memoir following Melody Moezzi, the author, through her experience with bipolar disorder, and I'm really enjoying it. She actually was raised in a family that was Persian, so they came over from Iran to America. She also had experience with a chronic illness for a time that really impacted her life, and then she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So not only is she able to show, first of all, the experience in America of having bipolar disorder, but also the experience of having Persian parents and living in an Iranian community and how that impacted her experience, as well as comparing her experiences of having a physical ailment and having a mental illness and how people reacted to each. So I am really liking it so far. I will say her language is very colorful, so if you don't really like that, be careful with this. She talks about straight from the beginning, she uses humor as a way of coping with things, and that comes out very strongly in this book. She makes a lot of jokes about mental illness in general, and so some of them may come across as very crass or may make some people uncomfortable. Personally, I can see the humor in it, but you just have to recognize that's how she copes with it. That's how she likes to deal with it, is to add humor and to make fun of it and recognize that it's not normal and that's okay and you can have fun with it. But I know some people might struggle with hearing that. I also will say she goes into depth about her experiences with suicidal fixations and attempts, so if that also is a trigger for you, probably don't read this. But if you are interested in this and think you can handle these sort of darker topics, definitely give it a shot because it's been very interesting so far. I'm about halfway through it and really liking it. So anyway, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below what you read for Victober or in October if you read other things that you really loved, especially if you really loved them and think I would like them, as I would love to know. Also, if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were on them, because I always love a good conversation. And I will see you next time. Bye!